All right, welcome back to the Contrarians. This is the show where we have there's Ralph sitting there. What's up?
uh, you had me listening to the final cut again in prep for this little thing, and it's an album that has been very, very near and dear to my heart for many, many, many years. Always a bit of a riddle of a record in the sense that everyone else seems to dislike it. And that initially I thought, I wonder why that is. And then after a while, you just don't care what people think of it because of some reasons we'll get into. And of course, I wrote about it in this fabulous.
Yes, I have my copy here as well.
Yes.
But let me stop you there because I thought you were stopping me. But I've got a few things to say about this as well as a little bit of background before we get into
Please, Martin,
what you're gonna talk about here. So yeah, essentially, we have sometimes a guest on. Sometimes it's one of the internal cabal where we go through somebody's favorite album by a band. And yes, I've had Ralph in this book, and I've got my Queen book out as well. Queen album by album. You probably even forgot you were in this one.
I know.
I have to go on
yeah.
I'm going on Guitar Hack tonight, and we're talking about Queen. We have to pick our top 5 albums, so that's with Pete Pardo and Hack. But yeah, so Ralph talked about the final cut in this, and he also talked about Obscured by Clouds and Adam Hartmother in there as well. So yeah, we've had Ralph back because he did such an awesome job on Peter Gabriel Scratch, the second album. It's one of my favorite episodes we've ever done here on Contrarians. And Ralph, of course, is the greatest expert on classic rock our fine country of Canada has. Period. So I definitely prog rock, let's put it that way, but probably a lot of classic rock as well. And yeah, sure. He really knows his stuff. We worked together on a lot of things, Banger Films, the Rush movie, the ZZ Top movie, a few other things, Metal Evolution. But yeah, I've had him as a cast member in these books, and also I think the Rush one as well, the Rush album by album. I believe
yes, I did Farewell to Kings and what else did I talk about?
Fly by Night, I think possibly,
Fly by Night, yeah, I love that album.
Yeah.
You know, the Rush film is interesting. Not to digress too far, that was the first thing we worked on. I think, other than writing, I was hired to create the pitch for Metal Evolution, right? And you were part of that team that was already put together. And the Rush film is it's still very near. I worked 4 months on that film. I don't know how long you worked on it, but
9 months full time I was in there. Yeah.
Well, 9 months, but I put my self-deprecation aside to say there's a lot of great stuff in that film that's because of me.
Yeah, I know.
Because of me. The whole dinner scene at the end, Sam and Scott crowing about that, but when I saw that first rough cut, they didn't even have any footage of those guys all together. And the first thing I said to them was, get a scene where they're all together. And like, ooh. Anyway.
Well, when I think of things that are because of you in these movies, I mean, I know you have some stories that we won't be repeating here about the ZZ Top movie, but there's a lot a lot of interesting stories about that film. But perhaps that's for another time.
Another day. But I do last thought. I do encourage people who see the Triumph film that I wrote or the ZZ Top film that I wrote. Feel free to reach out to me on Facebook or LinkedIn, and I'd love to know anybody's opinions on those films. I honestly would, even if you think they stink, and of course that won't be my fault. But one of the things that's frustrating is because I'm not really online, I find it the lack of feedback I get for some of these projects that took years of my life. ZZ Top was 2.5 years. Triumph was 18 months. Of a lot of stuff. I'd love to hear what the fans think of this stuff. Anyway,
cool.
I digressed.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about the final cut. This is the last Pink Floyd album with Roger Waters, and Rick Wright is not on it as well. Basically, this is Roger at the end of that whole run of great albums, kind of taken over the band, and there's starting to be a lot of animosity between the guys. there was this high idea that a lot of this material was going to be, was under the working title of Spare Bricks, and it was going to be used as some of the, extra music for the soundtrack to the film. And yeah, they're fighting over the material that's going on this. David Gilmour doesn't think it's very good, and yet he's not really turning in much, and he's kind of admitted as much that he wasn't doing a lot there. We know Roger. It's a story by Roger. I mean, it's even called what is it? A Requiem for the where's my notes here?
Post-war dream.
Yeah. So and then performed by Pink Floyd. And when we say performed by Pink Floyd, again, Rick's not there. David only co-lead vocals on the one sort of up-tempo song on here. There's a lot of Michael Kamen orchestration and stuff. And it didn't sell particularly well. It didn't get toured. We had the breakup of the band. Roger didn't think the band was going to continue without him, but lo and behold, it does. Roger goes off to a solo career. The reviews weren't that great. It usually doesn't chime in as one of the favorite Pink Floyd albums for a number of reasons. But that's why we have Ralph here, because we want to talk a little bit about the idea of getting a little more of an appreciation for this album and a little more of the backstory for it. So yeah, Ralph, I don't know. Take it away. Let us know why this is. In fact, you've told me. I mean, you've said this is your favorite Pink Floyd album, right? Tell me a bit about the record and tell me why it's your favorite.
Yeah. As I was saying, it's where to start. It is by and large my favorite Pink Floyd record. It wasn't always my favorite Pink Floyd record, but it is a record. I mean, I love the whole catalog, full stop. But Martin, you must know this. There are records in life, Empty Glass by Pete Townsend, the second Peter Gabriel album, that they age with us. Pete Townsend, All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes is another one, where you buy that record when you're 17, 18, and for a variety of reasons, the performances, some of the guitar parts, you're entranced by it. And maybe the lyrics don't hit you, but as you get older, you keep returning, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, to those records, because the lyrics become more and more important to you, or you relate more because you get older and you get, you've taken a lot more hits. You're more vulnerable. You should be anyway, if you evolve, more prone to empathy and sympathy and humanity. And you realize it's not necessarily dog eat dog, or it doesn't have to be dog eat dog. So I respond to records that really do just genuinely move me in terms of how the writer expresses the human condition and the frailty and the grief and the struggle and all those things that I'll talk a bit about. And that's the final cut, because I'm 56 years old now. And I find this mystifying. You see it on music boards like Steve Hoffman, people writing, well, I used to listen to that when I was 19, but I grew out of it. And I would venture to say the final cut, more than any other Floyd record, is not a record I could ever imagine growing out of. I could never imagine a lyric like button your lip and don't let the shield slip. Put a fresh face on your bulletproof mask, ever not being relevant as we make our way through life. And especially, for people of our vintage we watch our parents get older and pass on, and you see their struggles. That's all in this. That's all. It may be not dead specific, but the feelings, and again, the grief and the trauma and all that, it's like a friend that I turn to. And that's not always I don't want to denigrate Pink Floyd fans. I don't really know that many, certainly personally. But I often hear Pink Floyd discussed in terms of, rightly so, but Gilmour's soaring guitar, and Waters' angry lyrics, or his, but not necessarily in terms of how perceptive Waters was. And Anyway, that's that. I just want to step back for a second and tell you a bit about how I got into the Final Cut. Because, and I feel that I'm unencumbered in many ways, unlike older Pink Floyd fans who got into the band earlier. I'm a second generation. My brother was into Pink Floyd, so he brought home Dark Side of the Moon. He brought home Wish You Were Here. He brought home Animals, brought home The Wall. And they were his records that I was aware of. And I remember looking at the chicken scrawl on the inside of The Wall and thinking, what is this? As I reached for, the first Cars album or something like that, it was completely alien to me. And Pink Floyd didn't mean that much to me, 15, 16, 17 years old. But one day I was in college, so I was about 19 or 20, and I was fixated on a woman who, was unrequited, to say the least. And it was one of these situations where I was her friend, but I wanted more and she didn't. And we went out one night. And again, it was an evening of unfulfilled expectations, but we went back to her apartment and she promptly fell asleep. And I just turned on the radio and sat at the foot of her bed, and Comfortably Numb came on the Mighty Q or something. And it was obviously a song I'd heard, but I heard it in a completely new light that night, specifically Dave Gilmour's voice, which struck me as otherworldly. It was so astoundingly beautiful. And my point is, after that moment, Dave Gilmour, to me, his voice was the sound of Pink Floyd. And that's, as I move forward, Pink Floyd was Dave Gilmour's voice, as you would rigidly when you're 20, 21 years old. So flash forward a year or so later, and I was with a friend I was visiting in Chatham, and he brought out the Final Cut, and we're listening to it. And I'm growing more and more bored and uncomfortable and irritated that where's Dave's voice? And this guy said, oh, Dave he only sings on one cut. It's near the end of the second side. I had no interest in it whatsoever. So that's where I was in my early 20s, Final Cut. And that kind of opinion was, I think, supported by any Pink Floyd fan I met, hence. So again, age is in many ways the great detractor, but it's also the great gift giver. As I got older and I got into university let me step back. Key thing happened in 1987. A Momentary Lapse of Reason came out. Now, I was a huge fan of Dave Gilmour's About Face record. I thought that was a spectacular album. Gorgeous record. Proved that he could write lyrics with the best of them. You listen to that cut near the end, called Near the End, at the end of the album, and you realize when he put his mind to it, he was an extremely accomplished lyricist, arranger, blah, blah, blah. I love that album. So A Momentary Lapse of Reason comes out, and it, to me, bears all the stamp of being a manufactured product, a piece of product. It felt like, what's the word? Mechanical, a contrivance. And I did not like it at all. I was pissed off that he didn't continue on About Face, that trajectory. I had all the other Pink Floyd, so I was looking forward to that, but it didn't sit well with me. So there I was with this new Pink Floyd album thinking, I want a new Pink Floyd album. And somewhere in there, I thought, the Final Cut, I've never really given that a chance. And I was mad at Dave at this point. So perhaps that was the window back to the Final Cut. And I went out and I bought a copy of it. And it struck me as completely different than I wasn't looking for Dave's voice anymore. I was looking to just listen to it. And that's when I started to hear it unencumbered by a lot of negativity. And obviously the first thing that hit me, or obvious to me, was the soundscape that's painted right at the, that this is a production album, as all Pink Floyd albums are, but there was something completely cinematic about this. Even on my old Harman Kardon with my realistic speakers, I could hear just how enveloping that record was, or was going to be. And the other thing is, I was now 22, 23, and I was becoming a lot more sophisticated. I had gone through my great prog discovery. So I got into Genesis and Yes and Crimson and Tull and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Van der Graaf Generator. And so my palette for what was acceptable to me unconsciously and again consciously had broadened. So and even though I had listened to Floyd, as I said, I'd never listened to it with those ears. I listened to it as that's Gilmour's voice. So all of a sudden that invited me in, just the strength of the production. And some of the things that had already been leveled about it, which always struck me as curious, and this is a general rule in life, people started saying when I started to talk about, oh, that's not really a Pink Floyd album. I got into many fisticuffs with this idea, because it's an album to me that's, the detractors of this album have been, their detractions have, in my mind, been built largely on myth and malice. Myth and malice. This is an album attacked by myth and malice. The malice of Dave Gilmour and the myth of fans who... So as you said at the top, this started out as Spare Bricks. But the idea that, which Gilmour perpetuated, that the record was, why should we record songs we already rejected? Or these types of, or it's not real because Rick Wright's not there. Well, Rick Wright was, as you know, Martin, was basically a hired hand on the wall, and it's very difficult to hear what's him and what's Bob Ezrin, and there might even be Fred Mandel may also be on the wall. I can't remember. So there was a coterie of keyboard players, but Pink Floyd to me, even at the age of 22, 23, was a band that always brought in guests. Dick Perry and Claire Torrey and Jeff and Joe Porcaro are on the wall, and Roy Harper sings on Have a Cigar. And so that always struck me as odd that people said it's not a Pink Floyd album because Andy Newmark's on it, and Andy Bown, I think his name is, and Ray Cooper. And so whenever there's a contradiction in a criticism, I usually dismiss the criticism, if that makes sense to you. Like if you're attacking the album because it's a Rogers solo record where he's hired in people, I thought, no, it's not. It's still got Nick Mason, who plays some beautiful work. And of course, Dave Gilmour, who does some of my all-time favorite Floyd solos. And yeah, Dave doesn't take a producer's credit, but I don't know if I knew then, but he still took the points. He still is, I feel him, even if he walked away from that record disdainfully. So it never sounded, one of the things people say about it, why I love it, but people say is it sounds like a Roger Waters solo album. But anyone who's heard Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking, Radio Chaos, Amused to Death, etc., I don't hear, obviously it's coming from Roger's pen, so there's going to be a continuity there. But to me, they all sound very different from the final cut, which is uniquely Pink Floyd because of the presence. Yes, some of the musical themes that you hear on the wall, notably say on the title track, Final Cut, you hear strains of the sort of dreamy ooziness of Comfortably Numb. But that just leads me to believe that it's not Roger Waters solo, it's Pink Floyd. I don't know if I'm overstating this, but it's always sounded like a Pink Floyd record, far more than A Momentary Lapse of Reason, which had, different drummers and all these programmers and different bass players and all the rest of it. So to be, the show is called The Contrarians. It struck me as odd that I was a contrary point of view that I took, that this was a Pink Floyd album, because to me, I couldn't hear anything else but Pink Floyd. Right. So anyway, back to the record itself. What I found, Roger Waters has always had a way with, and when I was 22, 23, 24, I wasn't really concerned about, I remember the Falklands War, which is some of this record is inspired by, as much as the death of his dad. But I wasn't a political animal. I wasn't really a history buff. It never struck me as oppressive. I had to know about a war. or anything like that. What I keyed into, which again, I don't understand detractors who dismiss this record. Not to belabor that, but what I keyed into, which is what I always keyed into with Roger Waters, was his extraordinary ability, again, to plug into the human condition. And you saw that with, it's in the book a bit with Obscure Black Clouds, Free For, what's the line from Free For? Life is as short, death is a, it's the life is short, death is this long, cold bed, and when you're 21, 22, 23, and you're just grasping I read somewhere that it's in your early 20s, you start to realize, oh, I will die. I will get old and die. And his, not fixation, but his desire to write about those topics, about what's the great line in You Missed the Starting Gun in not Breathe, but Time itself, the whole song Time. So anyway, the Final Cut in my mind lyrically was a continuation of those themes. It wasn't a retread. It was an older man, because I think he's 40 when this record came out or whatever. It was an older guy still ruminating on, again, the frailties and the vulnerabilities of the human condition, which I was very much keyed into. I was also a big, and remain a huge, John Lennon fan. So an album like Plastic Ono Band, which took John Lennon's occasional dalliances with personal lyric and made a whole album out of it, which to me was an extraordinary piece of work from a lyric standpoint, especially. That to me was the Final Cut, was Waters doing something that he'd been dabbling with, but then making a whole album out of it. And arguably Animals is that it wasn't unprecedented, but in my mind, it was I was confused because it was being slammed for the very thing that I thought should be celebratory. And again, you can go through that album and find, there's a line in the title track, Final Cut, thought I'd bare my naked feelings, thought I'd tear the curtain down, which, at the risk of overstating, I thought it was an extraordinary thing to write in a song, but it was also comforting, that particular line. So all these lyrics, this album was chock full of humanity, again, futility, grief, vulnerability, rage, all rendered with this exquisite poetry, like Springsteen, Dylan, Lennon, McCartney sometimes, Peter Gabriel, all come to mind as these people who just could put a line together that would shake you to the core. And again, left you in a positive way, realizing that we're not alone, but time is finite. So, I talk a lot in the book, because you asked me to write about Final Cut, about the war part of the record, the Falkland War, the Fletcher Memorial Home, some of these pieces that are distinctly about the Falkland War. And there's an element of this record that always feels like it was torn from the headlines of '82, of the sinking of the General Belgrano and the sinking of the Sheffield, all that happened in the Falkland War. But of course, where do we find ourselves now in 2022? We find ourselves in another insane, pointless war where people are not just civilians. And, one of the more profoundly painful things that I saw is footage of a zoo in Kyiv, maybe, of these starving animals. It just enraged me. The war enrages me. And where does that take me? It takes me back to the final cut. As long as we as a species cannot figure this out, and we'll never figure it out because we're a flawed species, we're a cancer on the planet without getting too negative, we'll always fight, we'll always find reason to fight, and we'll always send people to do our dirty work. So not only is the final cut a constant reminder of the frailty of life, but it's the constant reminder of the stupidity and the inhumanity of political leaders, of the war machine, of profit over people, of all those things. So just on that level, I don't understand why anyone would not like the final cut, because it's perpetually relevant in a way, but because it's so poetic, it's never a polemic, which is one of the things that also has been leveled at. Oh, it's Roger banging away. What did Gilmore once say? Oh, what is this millionaire rock star? You'd think he'd be happy from time to time. Totally. And I love Dave Gilmore. And he's written so many extraordinary songs, but I just think that's a petty, subjective thing between those two men arguing over who leads the legacy of Pink Floyd. But I hope that's making sense. That's the again, just we're talking about this album now in May of 2022, and we're in a war. And again, it reminds me, that's why you listen to the final cut. That's why, if you want to know why there's a war and why people in Russia are standing by Putin, or were led to believe, who really knows, but the cult of personality, why people stand by the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong II, or any of these authoritarian regimes. It's all in the final cut. I'm always attracted to albums that the key to understanding life is in those, Tea for the Tillerman by Cat Stevens, the second Peter Gabriel album, All the Best Chinese Eyes. These records are the key. If you're confused, if you don't excuse my language, if you don't get life, it's in these records. You just sit with the lyric sheet and go, oh, what I'm feeling is that, oh, that's what this means. That's what this is about. I'm not crazy. And the final cut reminds me I'm not crazy. I'm angry because I deserve to be angry. This whole thing is ridiculous and stupid. When the Americans illegally invaded Iraq, what was the record I listened to? The final cut. When 150,000 Iraqis died and 7,000 or 8,000 American soldiers in their 20s pointlessly died. Final cut. It's an album, and yet it's not an album of sloganeering or of lowest common denominator kind of anti-jingoism. And I'm sorry, I'm all over the place, but another piece that I love about this record is, in many ways, it's an answer, whether it's Waters' intent or not. But in The Wall, teachers are villainized. These sort of headmasters who humiliate the kids, who call them out for every little bit of weakness. Yet they're recast in this record as vets. Bear with me. I've got to find the lyric to The Hero's Return, I think. Or is it, I think it is The Hero's Return, trying to whip these little ingrates into shape. And it goes on about, as he's doing this, he's dreaming of flying over Dresden and firebombing the city, and nobody knows how tormented and traumatized. Waters is able to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder in this beautifully understated, searing kind of way that allows war, at the same time as he's vilifying the conductors, he's humanizing those forced to do it. Even if they were villains cast in The Wall, they're now the guy at the bar struggling with alcoholism. And there's a moment that always makes me emotional in the song Paranoid Eyes, where he's casually leaning on the bar, and you can hear the bartender or waitress saying, okay, kiddo, like this woman's voice saying, it's going to be all right. You know, you're not alone in this, the humanity of that. And I wonder if people, what I recommend is with this record as well is, so here's a pair of, these are called Ultrazone Edition 11, German made, handmade German headphones. They're expensive. I don't deny it. But when you listen to the final cut on a good pair of headphones and you absorb everything that he's put out, that he's laid out onto that album, laid out onto tape, I don't know how you can't be moved by it. How you?
Well, yes. Also, I want to ask you that. How would you defend against people's disdain for the music on the final cut?
So, Martin, that's an interesting question. And we've had more than a few debates ourselves about the merits of people like Elton John, or it's very hard to defend what I can't hear. You know, there's one song, The Hero's Return, which starts off with these mass guitars. It's like and a bit of what sounds like backwards. So the production and the arrangement on these records, on this record, is unique, is melodic, is riveting. It's a veritable sonic feast. So I don't understand that. I don't know the drum production, Michael Kamen's arrangements, where he places, like on Paranoid Eyes, where he places the cellos and the double bass. All I hear is melody. All I hear is an extraordinary sense of musicality.
Does it bother you that stuff is there, though? All the classical instrumentation, the orchestration?
Why would it? And again, I think part of it is being a second generation Pink Floyd fan. I was allowed the space to develop a love of the band. You know, it's a you know, I have this debate with Paul McCartney fans who dismiss records, and my response is, I love the artistry of Paul McCartney. So anything he attempts, I find I allow. I don't have to ask him to justify it for me. So anything that Roger and Michael and Gilmour did on this record, I don't say, wait a second, this isn't meeting my definition of Pink Floyd. It's, okay, this is something new. This is exciting. And unlike, say, A Momentary Lapse of Reason, which rightly or wrongly felt like About Face didn't produce commercially what Dave hoped. He did a smaller tour, small theaters. I think he played Massey Hall here in Toronto. And he went on record saying that he didn't want to go back to square one. Just like Genesis, when they hired Ray Wilson, canceled their whole tour because they couldn't face playing smaller venues. So that record, A Momentary Lapse of Reason, felt like a deliberate attempt to drag people into stadiums, and that's exactly what happened. But the final cut feels like, this is what I want to do. This is from Roger. This is where I am. Come with me as you've come with me through the whole journey, and I'll give you something completely new. Sounds that you haven't heard before. Yeah, like there's some melody ideas that you could say are reminiscent of The Wall, because he composed Pros and Cons in The Wall, and I think this all at the same time. So that doesn't matter to me. You know, hearing Lennon repeat himself in 65 and then in 68, it's just, where are you taking me now? So I guess, I don't know if this is a response that you're looking for or is valid, but to me, it's the next. I love Pink Floyd, or I hit that point in my life where I loved Pink Floyd. What else did they have for me? And so that's my response, is I love that. I bring it on. I love Kamen's piano work and his Hammond work. And I'm not getting all snooty and saying, well, where's Rick Wright? Because Rick's gone for a variety of reasons. He wasn't there anymore. Some may be exaggerated, some may not be. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. I'll go where the band takes me. I'll go where Roger takes me because I love the band. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Like, I don't feel like I have to defend. Often my response when people criticize, and it sounds like, there's this expression fanboy. I think and you must be like this with, I know there's bands that you love, like ZZ Top and Blue Oyster Cult, who go on these crazy. Blue Oyster Cult went on some crazy artistic turns. Uriah Heep, and you go, wow, okay, let's explore this. And if the songwriting is there, and that's the key, if the songwriting is there, and if the lyrics are there, and you're not kind of trying to deceive me, you're actually doing something authentic, which arguably is a very subjective evaluation from a fan, but I never felt anything in the final cut was false. And to add to that, this album was recorded in, I think he called it holographics. It was certainly, even though The Wall was an exquisite sounding record and remains so, I felt the final cut was Roger gifting me more. If you thought The Wall sounded good, this will blow your mind.
It's true. Yeah.
And I missed out on sort of the quad thing of the 70s. I certainly embraced the next thing, which he embraced, which was Q sound. And then we got into high res surround, and I went through all that. But the people who don't like that, I say, I can't help you. I don't understand. I honestly don't understand. If you love listening to Dark Side of the Moon and how extraordinary that record sounds, to me, they're completely connected. They're using different tools, and Roger's a much more arguably sophisticated, broader palette artist, but it's still coming from the same guy. It's still a guy at the height of his powers, marrying lyrics to music in a way that makes him a genius.
And you've talked about David as a singer. What does Roger's voice do for you? What does it say to you? Because this is all Roger, right?
Right. So what does it say to me? We talked a bit about this in the Peter Gabriel thing, which is my fascination with people who are not perhaps naturally gifted singers, but can inhabit so thoroughly an emotion, who can sing a line in a way that's unfettered by perhaps technique, even something. Not that I think anything Roger does on this album is out of pitch, but there's parts of it. It's like, to me, it's like, and I mentioned it in the book, it's like Olivier, or it's like Al Pacino in his prime, or De Niro. It's a guy who just, he's, or Jack Lemmon, or any of these great actors. Roger, yes, he wrote the line, but he sees the line as a singer, and he approaches it like, how can I serve this line that's been written? And that's how I hear that, is a singer who, and I don't, it took me a few years, but I thought Dave couldn't have sung any of these songs. I used to think, well, maybe I wonder what it would sound like if he sang Paranoid Eyes. And listen to a song, and I encourage anyone to listen to the song near the end, the last track on About Face. He can emote, which is not even the strongest word. He can make you feel despair and longing and yearning. But he's not Roger Waters. So to me, it's a tour de force record in terms of vocals. But you got to hop on board. You got to say, I'm a fan of Pink Floyd. Again, I'm repeating myself, but you got to approach this record. And I say this in retrospect as, okay, what do you got for me? I love you. Now I want you to take me somewhere else. And there's no record in my mind. Some people would say a Wall leftover. I don't agree at all from its point of view, from its production, from its arrangements, from its, the only constant, ironically, are, in my mind, Dave's guitar, which he does some of his greatest work of his career on the title track and Fletcher Memorial Home. Those solos are, any other artist, if if a solo like that existed, you'd say that was the highlight of the record. But that's just one of the many highlights. But at the risk of sounding ass backwards, it's Dave and Nick who make that record arguably samey. If you wanted to say, oh, it's a retread of something, it's mostly Dave and Nick that drag me back into the classic Floyd sound. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I'm not being critical. But when people say it's kind of a derivative record, I think, well, I don't hear it from what Roger's doing. I hear it more like, and it's interesting with something like Two Sons in the Sunset, where Roger, presumably Roger or Roger and Michael, brought in Andee Newmark just as they brought in Jeff Porcaro. It's like they consciously wanted to, or why they brought in Joe Chimay and Tony Tennille and all those backing singers for The Wall. Occasionally they wanted something outside of what the players could do, but it was still under the auspices of Pink Floyd. So you went with it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I love the austerity of the cover itself. I love the what seems like a jab at, I don't know now, like it's hard to separate fact from fiction. The knife in the back is like, it perhaps is to Alan Parker because Roger and him fought, the director of The Wall. I don't know. It was again, I said near the beginning of this that the album often felt like a riddle. It was a riddle to me why everybody hated it, but there was a riddle. The packaging was a riddle. What did that mean? It's just enigmatic. It's just the typeset of how the final cut is written, how it's credited, which you mentioned at the beginning, Requiem for the Post-War Dream by Roger Waters as performed by Pink Floyd or performed by, it was just interesting to me. It was just all, again, I'm a Beatle head. So the fact that those guys would tear up the blueprint and move on, that's what the final cut to me is. And when you add to that a record where it lyrically only gets more pertinent and more relevant to you, and certainly in 2022, I challenge anyone to play me a record that sounds as good as a record that's 40 years old. That's yet another reason to embrace the final cut is the sound.
One other thing I wanted to ask you. So he calls this a requiem for the post-war dream. So he had this post-war dream, this hope after World War II. But this isn't all Falklands War. It's also Britain at home and Margaret Thatcher, right? Where the dream has died. How has the dream died for him?
I think part of it is what I mentioned and why he draws a parallel between the Second World War and the Falklands War is it's still, he lays it out, Brezhnev and friends and the anonymous meatpacking glitterati, and he draws the parallel. But a requiem for the post-war dream. So what is the line? It's in No One Hurts the Children Anymore. Bear with me.
I was just listening to that.
Yeah. Oddly enough, it's The Gunner's Return, I believe, where there's a whole set of lines where the fallen character dreams of this time where the world is safe and secure. And then he returns to it. I think it's in Two Sons in the Sunset as well, where everyone has recourse to the law. One of the reasons why I never thought this album was negative is he calls out the futility of and the horror and the trauma of the Second World War. He relates it to what Thatcher is doing, the relentless, it's in Not Now, John, the destruction of rampant capitalism, of building faster, better, the competition, how it lays waste to humanity. Again, he invokes the Falklands War. But there are bits throughout that record, and again, near the end of Two Sets in the Sunset, he leaves you with the sense of maybe we can do this if we just recognize the people who are doing this and the injustice of it and the what is the word, the criminality of it. There is something on the other side of it. There is redemption and hope, and that's why I always took the record as hopeful, because there's such sweetness that runs. I talk a lot about the humanity of again, don't let the shield slip, the incredible empathy, but also the rumination and the musing about what it could be. No one kills the children anymore. It's hard to say that the album is angry when it contains lines like that, or it's a polemic, or it's depressing, or it's hope. I found hope through all of his work. Certainly his Final Cut onwards, I've always found that in. So I don't know if that answers your question, but and again, that's what returns us to now, which we're getting these dual things. We're getting the horrors of this war in Ukraine, but we're also getting these little stories about, one woman or a couple rescuing 62 dogs or 117 dogs, or we do get these little silver linings of hope. Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah, he can. I guess my point is that's obviously there, the condemnation of war, et cetera, et cetera. But what I've always keyed into is the empathy and the hope of the record.
Yeah.
That
cool.
if you're not inclined to like it, you won't hear it.
Yeah.
You really have to, again, like that second Peter Gabriel album, I think everyone, before they rip an album apart, I don't know, should sit and just read it as a, but I know that's not a lot of people do that. Yeah. It's kind of funny that Gilmour, to me, ham-fistedly or hackneyed, when he did Dogs of War on a momentary lapse of reason, I thought, buddy, that's not your wheelhouse, man. Yeah. You're entitled to that. Yeah. Of course you are. And I don't know whether it was Anthony Moore who wrote those lyrics. I can't remember the writing credits. But to me, there's no more perfect piece of commentary about humanity and about war and about the futility of war and the human condition than a Final Cut. I've never heard a record that can seem subject-wise so broad and so historical, yet at the same time, it's the perfect blending of the macro and the micro storytelling that seamlessly weave. So 1 minute you're in a meat locker or you're at Southampton Dock, and the next minute you remember being 22 and not being able to get out of bed because you're so sad that life isn't working out. And that's got nothing to do with war. It's got something to do with what Roger can do, which is impart to you, you're not alone. And this is life. And all you got to do is try to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty incredible. I mean, that's a great exposition on this record, and I hope people appreciate and will go back and, like you say, read this album. There's there's the words, there's the music, and obviously you're up against quite a catalog here, because I was just reading some stuff the other day. I mean, people still talk about Dark Side of the Moon as one of the greatest albums of all time. We asked our Patreon subscribers, just, quickly, like, what is your favorite Pink Floyd album? Not telling them you were coming on and doing this, but we had Rand Kelly chose Metal, which is kind of interesting. I do see Metal come up sometimes as people's favorite albums, and you never see anything pre-Metal. Simon Sevenson picked Dark Side of the Moon. Michael Weisbrot picked Metal again. Grant Arthur, he's on on our shows a lot. He picked Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which is kind of interesting, because even if you're in an encapsulated, closed-in world of let's just look at psych rock, I mean, Pink Floyd was very good at that at the very beginning, and pioneers of that as well, right?
I look at that record like I look at the pre-Justin Hayward Moody Blues. It is Pink Floyd. Definitely it's Pink Floyd, and it's celebrated, and rightly so. But it has nothing to do with the Pink Floyd that I love.
Yeah.
So when people pick that, it's like, okay, fair enough.
And we had Don the Chaldean picked Animals. I like Animals a lot as well. Reed Little picked Animals. I fall somewhat in line with the camp that wants to hear the intimacy of those four players playing back and forth to each other all the time. And I think that's what you hear a lot on Animals. Maybe not a lot of, well, actually Rick Wright as well, but just, drums, acoustic guitar, and either Roger or David singing. It's a simplicity, and it's a chemistry that you want to hear a lot. And that's also why I think a lot of people will pick Wish You Were Here as well as a favorite album as well.
Yeah.
But,
The thing is, sorry.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I have no issue with someone saying, I no issue whatsoever. I think it's great that they love Floyd, who has an extraordinary, I use that word a lot and I use it because it's not something I see anymore, but they have peerless records, stunning, unbelievable records. So if someone said, you know what, Dark Side of the Moon is my favorite Floyd record, I'd say, great. Yeah. That's an incredible record. What I don't understand is people saying, oh, I love Dark Side, I love Metal, and I want to touch on something you just said. But I don't like Final Cut. It's the derision of it's like, I'm not suggesting anyone should love the Final Cut as much as I do. It's the dismissal of it that has always, or at least for the past 3 decades, it's like, you don't have to take a crap on it. It doesn't have to be your favorite. But if you can't hear what's on it, that mystifies me. As a Floyd fan, if you can't hear that. But what you said earlier about Pink Floyd being in part the band playing, I hear it. I don't hear Rick there, but I hear Nick and Dave and Roger playing. Rightly or wrongly, a lot of that ensemble feel that is so Floyd is not absent to me and you could point to Two Sons in the Sunset, but I guess you could say the same thing about Mother, that had Jeff Porcaro doing an absolutely perfect drum track. But I didn't sit there and go, well, that doesn't sound like Pink Floyd. I want, you could say the same thing about Have a Cigar, which is one of the quintessential Pink Floyd tunes. It just happens to have someone who's not in the band singing it. That's what I pointed to earlier. There's inconsistency in that. One of the things I hate in life are double standards and hypocrisy. And that's all I want to say to Pink Floyd fans is love what you love. And I'll be right with you saying, yeah, there's a day or two that Metal is an unbelievable record.
Yeah.
But if the chips are down and I'm trying to get through life and what do I plug into the most? It's the Final Cut. Yeah. Just is. But I celebrate that whole catalog. But if you don't mind, I wanted you to read a couple more of what people said, because I find this fascinating.
Yeah, there's not a lot of detail here, but Todd Evans, one of our subscribers, also chooses Animals. I think he says the best musically. Wall's very close second. David Bottaspin, I've been loyal to Animals for years. Their most guitar centric LP. Adam Hart Mother's my close second if you want a contrarian best in hindsight. 1977 supposed prog ethos was to devolve, and Floyd actually bucked being shoved into that corner. They leaned into a playbook more commonly for the early 70s prog standards, as well as made it look easy to improve on the peaks of the last few albums. Big props due for what Physical Graffiti did, succeeding at utilizing older material lying around without any of it sounding like unworthy B-sides. Rolling Stone did a top 10 and actually got it into the top 10 at number 8.
They got the final cut into the top 10?
Yeah. Let's see. Slogged their way through the disc is a strong anti-war statement. It earned some good reviews when it came out, but many fans feel it aged poorly. And that again is a superficial thing because it's just using literally, it has in it names of people who were in the news at the time. So it's a superficial sort of a complaint about that. Ultimate Classic Rock had it 10 out of number 15 or 10 out of 15. Far Out Magazine had it number 10 out of 15 albums ranked. Best Ever Albums put it at number 10. Consequence Sound put it at number 10. Let's see. Cat Blackheart from Consequence Sounds. Let's see if we could find something here. Explores the sacrifice of soldiers, both physically and emotionally, the cost of perpetuating war, inevitable nuclear holocaust, a haunting, heartfelt record that humanizes the plight of the ex-military in ways seldom represented. Musically, the album embodies the complexity and rage of its subject matter. While Not Now John comes off as silly in the grand scheme of the album, tracks like The Final Cut, the song cycle of The Hero's Return and The Gunner's Dream, and the revisionist inclusion of The Wall B-side, When the Tigers Broke Free, are powerful and well-crafted songs that build into a profound, if not sobering, listening experience. Louder Sound had it way down the running order. Again, the trope about it being very much like a Roger Waters album. And if I was to pick one that is the most like, I would say Amused to Death, I would say, at least sonically. In terms of the song picture. Final Cut, a greater sense of clarity than The Wall, is also more bitter and vicious as the opening post-war dream shows with its caustic attack of the nature of war. Fletcher Memorial Home. Waters literally spits out his condemnations of the world's incurable tyrants, Leonid Brezhnev, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher. So yeah, and it basically the adding it all up, it's usually Dark Side, Wish You Were Here. It's funny, lately I've been seeing a lot of just Facebook chatter of a lot of people putting down The Wall lately. It's kind of a weird thing. You get a lot of that going on, and I guess not having played it live, but Roger does do Southampton Dock pretty regularly, and I guess Not Now John got played quite a bit by Roger as a solo artist, right?
Yeah, I just want to say quickly, and we talked a bit about this in when we talked about Scratch, the Peter Gabriel record. I don't know whether it's because men are predominantly people who write about rock music, classic rock music, and what am I trying to say? I've never, other than a very good friend of mine, my friend Kevin, I've never heard anyone else talk about the Final Cut in the way that I like. All those things that you mentioned, that a scathing indictment of war, blah blah blah. Yeah, that all exists, but the tenderness in that record, and again the vulnerability and the idea of don't let the shield slip. Rock writers often, it seems, never either admit or can identify lines that are universally comforting and capture that human condition, and specifically the male condition, which is, we're designed, it's nothing new. We're designed to not let the shield slip. We're designed to put on the brave face. And no one talks about, when they criticize this record, no one says, well, I can certainly, all they plug into is the war part of it, which is, yeah, that's there. You know what I'm saying? And it's like the criticism of that second Peter Gabriel album, which again was this collection of these beautifully rendered short stories about the little guy in life. And people say, doesn't rock hard enough, or he doesn't know who he is, or it's like, what are you? How? Maybe it's me. Maybe it's just the kind of lyrics that I like. Again, I mentioned All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes and Empty Glass, two incredibly confessional records. And the other thing is, yeah, maybe people can't remove they can't remove the context. They can't identify a line or performance of a line without it being, oh, well, this guy is like a teacher who fought in the war, and that's who can't let the shield slip. It's not me. It's like it is. I hear that album and it's me. I'm not a war vet. I never went through that. I never floated down after I was shot down and hit the ground or had a dream of that. But the ideas are universal. And whenever I read critiques of these records of the Final Cut, that never gets mentioned. And I think, well, why? That's another riddle in my mind of the Final Cut. People hate it. They say it's not a Floyd album. I don't get it. People disparage it, but never mention the things that I love about it. Why am I crazy? I don't know.
No, that was great. That was really cool. So thank you again, Ralph. We'll leave it on that note. And you've reminded me, we probably should talk about doing some Pete Townsend. Definitely. That would be pretty cool to talk about. So, but yes, thanks again. Everybody, let us know what you think in the comments below about this. This has obviously been a very contrarian choice for Pink Floyd, but I think Ralph has argued it rather well. So yes, I believe you will see Ralph again soon again if he perchance deems to do another show, and maybe that will be Pete Townsend.
Yeah, as I said, Martin, I seem to be drawn to these contrarian records. I love Beach by ELP. There's so many different records where I can't conceive of what's wrong. Why can't you hear what I hear? And Chinese Eyes, of course, is that's another record that I felt vilified for liking.
Yeah.
I don't get it, but anyway, that's it. That's
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah. And maybe it will be Chinese Eyes we will talk about. But thanks again, Ralph. And
hold on. Isn't that one of your favorites? Isn't that one of your favorites?
Yes, it is. It's my favorite of that catalog. So that's great. So
anyway, I cut you off.
Okay. Very cool.
Well,
thanks
Martin.
again, Ralph. And we shall talk to you folks soon. Let us know what you think of the Final Cut in the comments below.
Feel free to reach out. Love to chat.
All right.